Colin, Tennant, The Fallen Bud by Jacques. Chapter 3. You ready? Okay, let's go. Soufrière is the second largest parish in St. Lucia. Its amazing landscape contains a volcano, sulfur springs, waterfalls, the Peter Mountains, and lush green forests, where birds of paradise and exotic parrots fly about singing songs that only they and the forest understand. Until quite recently, the town was mainly built of wooden houses, each with a veranda and a balcony, but at its center stood the cathedral, before which lay the town square surrounded by businesses like La Creole restaurant and the Home Hotel. Tarmac streets bordered with open storm drains still carried household waste down to the sea. But though it all looked like a setting from the old Wild West, in smell and ambiance, Soufrière, the capital of St. Lucia under the French, still had a decidedly French Caribbean character. The participants in the proposed transaction met again the following weekend, again at La Creole restaurant. Leonard Riviere produced some documents for approval and signature. Michael had not taken much notice of a new member of Tennant's party, Kent Adonai, until he started to read what Leonard Riviere had written on the sale agreement, which was supposed to be between himself and Colin Tennant. However, it turned out that the deed of sale was drafted as being between Michael, Jacques, and Kent Adonai. In other words, the manservant known to the islanders as TB and not Colin Tennant. Naturally enough, Michael was confused and grew angry. He pointed out to Leonard Riviere that the document was not what he had been instructed to draw up. Tennant stepped into the conversation and proclaimed that the documents contained what had been discussed. Michael at once realized that Leonard Riviere was a turncoat and was working for Tennant and not for him. Michael stood up, stared at the so-called aristocrat, and told him face to face, "You are a liar, a cheat, and a thief." Of course, he refused to sign any document. Colin Tennant's response was instantaneous. Now, a man demented, he stood there in his wide, floppy white hat and white Indian outfit, like God Almighty about to send thunder and lightning down on earth. Turning towards Leonard Riviere and Lamontagne, he commanded them to resolve the problem to his satisfaction. Then he stalked out of the room. Michael was too shocked to see straight away that Colin Tennant was deliberately creating a scene. In fact, the cunning aristocrat had staged the first part of his psychological move to turn the guest house and property at Bon-la-Croix into his new home where he and his manservant would live. But angry though he was, Michael had not failed to notice the affectionate smile that TB had exchanged with his master before Colin Tennant made off to his seafront apartment opposite the pier. Once there, Colin Tennant lay back on his bed, and as his sweaty shirt made contact with the mattress, he inhaled a cool breath of sea air. Meshing his fingers together, he rested his head on the palms of his large hands, and a satisfied smile spread over his Scottish face as he realized the idea of becoming the monarch of St. Lucia. Meanwhile, Michael found himself cornered by Little Lamentine and Little Coat, who explained that the document had been made out as between Michael and Kent Adonai rather than Tennant, because Tennant wanted to build a road down to the Jalousie estate without delay. Since Tennant was not a St. Lucian citizen, consequent legal delays arising from an agreement between Michael and non-citizen might lead, so Lamentine alleged, to delays in the development of the Jalousie estate, and so to the provision of work for the people of Soufrière. Suspecting his own dependability was being doubted, Leonard Riviere reminded Michael that he had recently dealt satisfactorily with the purchase of the property of Michael's grandfather, Charlie Jean, who wanted to retire and live in the town. Though advancing some legal arguments, or shall I start again? Through advancing some legal arguments, he mainly emphasized the need to adhere to the local custom of respect for one's seniors, which meant for the men who wore jackets and European suits to persuade Michael that he was acting in his client's best interest. Little Lamentine then asked Michael to talk with him a while on the La Creole balcony overlooking the town square. Below them, young lovers sat on benches amidst beds of fragrant flowers, and townsfolks mingle happily with foreign tourists, drifting curiously about or admiring the old cathedral, all of them oblivious to the discussion going on between the men looking over them. Little Lamentine placed his arm around Michael's shoulders and gave him a brotherly hug. Speaking in a cultivated British accent, he emphasized very seriously how much Colin Tennant could benefit their island home. It was difficult for Michael not to be overwhelmed by Lytton's words and by his appearance, which had been remarked upon that evening by Michaela Wilson, manageress of the Home Hotel, and even by Tennant himself. Towering over Michael, his authoritative presence subtly suggested itself through the thin cloth of his lightweight English suit. If this man could so easily impress the rich and the strong, how powerful could he intimidate the guileless young man before him? The sale document prepared by Leonard Riviere did not record the measurements of the piece of land Colin Tennant wanted to buy. Riviere, playing on Michael's belief in his loyalty, assured him that such measurements would be added to the document when the land surveyor visited him at Mont-Lacroix. The bland expressions on the face of Little Lamentine and Riviere disguised their intention of doing Tennant's biddings. Kent Adonai was told to recall Tennant, who on his arrival behaved as if he was at a jolly Christmas party. On the 22nd of May, 1989, in good faith, Michael accepted signed copies of the sale and lease agreement without any measurements or previous knowledge of how much property he had sold. But once outside the La Creole, he fell silent as he stood in the hot sun, hardly relieved by the breeze blowing in from the sea. His head spun. He felt dizzy and bewildered by what had just happened under the influence of Leonard Riviere. Chapter 4.